Good morning and welcome to the Geneva Summit for Human Rights, Intolerance, and Democracy. My name is Nazanin Afshin-Jam. I'm a human rights activist and president and co-founder of Stop Child Executions organization. I'm going to be acting as the chair for today's conference. And on behalf of the co-organizers, an international coalition of human rights NGOs, I'm honored to welcome all who have come near and far to join us today in the Geneva International Conference Center, directly across from the UN headquarters, the European headquarters, as well as all those who are joining us via webcast from around the world. We meet here one day before the UN Durban Review Conference, whose stated objective is to assess member states for their record on racism, discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The eyes of the world look on Geneva. Who will guide the assembled governments to properly address the human rights issues and situations of discrimination around the world that most require attention? Who will seek justice for millions of human rights victims around the world by demanding accountability from the government that oppressed them? Who will demand implementation for the victims most in need of the Durban Declaration's call for equality, non-discrimination, and fundamental freedom without distinctions of race, color, sex, language, religion, political, or other opinion, national or social origin? Who will speak out for the basic principles of human rights, tolerance, and democracy that were bequeathed to us in the aftermath of the barbarous acts of World War II by the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention, both of which now mark their 60th anniversary? Today's summit brings together some of the world's well-known human rights heroes, activists, dissidents, genocide survivors, legal scholars, diplomats, and statesmen. Victims and former prisoners of conscience will share with us their struggle, their suffering, and their dream of a more humane, free, and tolerant world. Today is an occasion for civil society to speak out for the millions of voiceless victims around the world, from Darfur to Tibet, Burma to Iran, who every day suffer from discrimination, repression, and persecution. Today, through an interactive session, NGOs networking, and our concluding declaration, we will urge the United Nations this week to live up to its founding ideals. And just one point of administration before we begin, please turn off your cell phones and any electronic devices that will disturb us today. We will have about 5 sessions. Each will lead us to about 6:30 p.m. and with a lunch break in between 12:45 and 2:30 p.m. It's all in your conference packages. And there are some question forms on your tables. Please write your questions, because after each session there will be it'll be open up to questions, and you can hand these to the staff that will be in the aisles, and they will be happy to provide it. And those that are watching us via live webcam, you can also submit your questions at questions@genevasummit.org. It's also written on the homepage there. As you may know, the President of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, will be addressing tomorrow's opening of the Durban Review Conference. I find it quite ironic that the man who denied the Holocaust from ever taking place and who called for the destruction of Israel is addressing this anti-racism conference. It reminds me of the time when the Islamic Republic of Iran sent Saeed Mortazavi, the chief prosecutor of Iran, as their key representative to the new Human Rights Council a couple years ago. The chief prosecutor that was involved in the death of Zahra Kazemi, the Canadian photojournalist, who I'm sure you've all heard about. I saw that as a slap to the face of the international community, and I see this also as a slap to the face of the international community. First of all, President Ahmadinejad and his unelected puppeteer, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, do not represent the people of Iran, but represent a regime of intolerance and the most brutal human rights violations one can imagine. I was born in Iran in 1979 at the start of the revolution, and that spiraled my country back into the Middle Ages and brought on severe human rights abuses. My father was imprisoned, tortured, and almost executed by the Revolutionary Guard simply for allowing alcohol, music, and dancing to be played at the hotel where he managed. This was forbidden under the new Islamic rule, but nobody gave him the memo to tell him this. I know the very real feeling of having to uproot from one's home and to start from scratch in another country at the expense of someone else's political agenda. I am pleased that this Geneva Summit is taking place, running parallel to the Durban Review Conference, because it gives a platform to people like myself, human rights defenders, NGOs, and victims of torture and human rights abuses, to speak truths. My fellow Iranian compatriots are sick of the lies and deceit of the Islamic Republic of Iran and lip service they give to the international community, and we are equally troubled by the relative inaction of the international community, or chosen blindsidedness for economic reasons, to address Iran's human rights abuses and back the people of Iran who so desperately need the help of the free world to be the voice on the world stage. In fact, I call on the countries that believe in freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and the Declaration of Human Rights to stand in solidarity with the people of Iran and walk out tomorrow from the Durban Review Conference when Mr. Ahmadinejad makes his address. I would like to directly quote President Ahmadinejad's comments and clarify some of the lies he's said in the last few years and set straight the record on what is truly taking place in Iran. False fact number one. Last year, when President Ahmadinejad addressed the National Press Club in New York, he said, "The freest women in the world are women in Iran." Yes, I hear a few giggles. That's exactly right. It's true that the women in Iran are strong. They're educated. 65% of the women in Iran are the people in universities are women in Iran. They participate in civil society. However, the regime cannot take credit for what the women's movement have built themselves. If they were so free and equal, why would there be a huge campaign in Iran called the 1 Million Signatures Campaign to End Discriminatory Laws in Iran, where women are trying to empower other women? It's a grassroots movement. They go door to door, empowering women, teaching them about their rights. Why would people like Nafisa Azad be imprisoned and arrested for simply collecting signatures for this campaign? Under Iran's penal code, which is based on Sharia law, it states that a life of a woman is literally worth half of a man's. So, for example, if you get into a car accident and you kill a woman, you would only have to pay half as much as if you killed a man in compensation. Women are denied equal rights when it comes to divorce, intolerance, and inheritance. When a woman travels, she needs to get permission from her husband or father in order to travel. She's forced to wear Islamic dress and cannot run for presidency or become a judge. I hardly call this being the freest in the world. Morality police would not have to go around arresting women, beating them for simply wearing boots over their jeans because it's considered too Western. Denying successful women rights activists to leave Iran and accept international prizes like Parvin Ardalan or Nasrin Sotoudeh. Those who are coming from abroad wanting to go back to Iran and do research. like Isha Muemi from the United States or Roxana Saberi, who just yesterday got an 8-year prison term on charges of trumped-up charges of espionage. The regime fears that it's standing on its last legs, that they even have to shut down Nobel Peace Laureate Shirin Ebadi's Human Rights Center. False fact number 2. In a speech at Columbia, Mr. Ahmadinejad said that there were no homosexuals in Iran. Could that be because the regime is executing homosexuals, like the case of teens Mahmoud Asghari and Ayaz Marhoni, who were publicly hung in 2005, or the more recent case of Makvan Muludzadeh in December 2007, who was charged with rape for homosexual acts when he was 13 years old. But the man that came forward, the other 13-year-old boy, said that this was not a rape. And though they put him on a donkey, paraded them, insulted him, and when he turned 18, they executed him. On that same vein, what about false fact number 3? What about the denial of the executions of juveniles taking place in Iran? Mr. Ahmadinejad, in his interview with the New York Times on September 26, 2008, said, "In Iran, youngsters are not executed. Where have they been executed? Our law actually sets 18 as the criminally liable age for capital punishment." As president and co-founder of the Stop Child Executions organization, I would like to remind Ahmadinejad of Mola Gol Hassan that was executed this year, the 8 children that were executed last year, and the 7 children executed the year before that. Not to mention the 140 plus children that are currently waiting on death row in Iran. Even Iran's deputy state public prosecutor Hossein Zepi announced a few months ago at the 63rd Annual UN General Assembly panel that a memorandum had been sent to all bodies of the judiciary in Iran to stop executions and instructed judges to issue a maximum sentence of life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 15 years in lieu of execution. Only to retract his statement 3 days later when the General Assembly was finished and clarified that what he meant was only drug traffickers. Iran is state party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which blatantly forbids the execution of those who've committed offenses before the age of 18. But what Iran does is they bastardize international law. Iran's penal code is based on Sharia law. In this law, it says that the age of puberty is 9 years old for a girl and 15 years old for a boy. This is clarified in Article 49 of Iran's penal code. Now, what they do is they say, fine, we won't execute a 9-year-old girl, but we'll wait till she turns 18 and then we'll carry out the execution, which is a blatant violation of international human rights law. That said, there have been cases of children being executed before the age of 18, as recent as June 2008, when an Iranian Kurd, Mohammad Hassanzadeh, was executed at the age of 16. Or a few years before that, Atif Sahal Rajavi, who was executed also at age 16 for acts incompatible with chastity. In other words, for having sex outside of marriage. In less than 24 hours from now, there's a girl named Delara Darabi who will be executed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. 17-year-old girl who spent the last 5 years in prison. Well, now she's 22. But unless people like you and me get involved and put enough pressure to grant a stay of her execution, there's new evidence which proves it was a right-handed person that committed the murder. She is left-handed, but they will not give her a new trial to present this new evidence. False fact number 4. Iranian officials, including the head of judiciary, have repeatedly said that there was a moratorium on stoning and that they were not taking place anymore. However, 1 man was stoned to death in March and 2 prior to that in December. Even if Mr. Ahmadinejad denies child executions and stonings, how does he justify the fact that Iran has the number 1 amount of executions in the world per capita, coming only second to China, many of whom are political prisoners and prisoners of conscience. I will leave this to Ahmad Batibi, the famous Iranian dissident that was imprisoned and tortured, to speak more about the situation of political prisoners. But just to give you a perspective, the Islamic Republic of Iran has imprisoned and tortured for the last couple years Ayatollah Burujerdi, who's a Shia cleric. He's one of their own, simply for advocating between the separation of religion and state. What I'm thinking is, if they can treat their own this way, what are they doing to other ethnic and religious minorities? Whether it's Sunnis, Sufis, Ahle Yasin, Dervishes, Zoroastrians, Christians, and among the worst, the Baha'is, who are often denied access to university and proper jobs. 7 of their top leaders having been imprisoned, a few of top Christian leaders in Iran being imprisoned. The list goes on. And just to put a human face to this, I would like to talk about Azita and Ahmed Reza, a refugee couple that just landed. I just welcomed them into Vancouver a couple of weeks ago. They're Christian converts. They spent 5 years in a prison in Iran, repeatedly getting tortured, both physically and emotionally. And they were made to promise that they would not continue with their activities. They were part of the 1999 student demonstrations for freedom and democracy. But they still felt the fear when they got out of prison because of the new apostasy laws that exist in Iran, the draft apostasy laws that would condemn somebody that converts from Islam to another religion to death. So they lived in fear for many years in hiding until they finally escaped through the mountains in Kurdistan to Iraq, onto Turkey, tried to get to Greece where Azita's family lived, only to get imprisoned, or they got arrested by the Greek police, sent back on the shores of the Turkish, in Turkey, and the Turkish police, the authorities grabbed them, put them in jail for 9 months for being illegal aliens, until finally UNHCR gave them refugee status, and then Canada gave them asylum. But what I'm trying to say here is that why should thousands have to escape Iran, their homeland country that they don't want to leave? The same lies exist for labor unionists in Iran. Many people are leaving. There's brain drain. Why is this oil-rich country have a spike in poverty, drug abuse, prostitution, HIV/AIDS? Believe it or not, they've even imprisoned some of the top leading activists in terms of HIV/AIDS, Drs. Kamyar and Arash Alai, currently in prison on charges for 3 and 6 years imprisonment because of talking about HIV/AIDS. They said that they've conspired with foreign governments, but it's all trumped up charges. Other countries are using these doctors as models to create their own HIV harms reductions programs, but yet my country of birth has imprisoned them. Why should I be even nervous being here in Switzerland? Because I know that dissidents have even been murdered outside of Iran. Because I know nothing is beneath the Islamic Republic of Iran. When the international community recognizes the real faces and voices of the Iranian people. We are good people with a rich history and a lot to offer. We are the sons and daughters of Cyrus the Great, the founding father of Persia, who drafted the first declaration of human rights the world has ever known 2,500 years ago, banning slavery and advocating for freedom of religion. Iranians want freedom. The demographics are on the side of democratic change. 70% of the population in Iran is below the age of 30. They're thirsty for freedom, thirsty to connect with the West. We simply need to empower them, the students, the women, the labor unions, and we will have the recipe for peace in Iran and the surrounding area in the Middle East. Those running for parliament shouldn't have to be vetted by the conservative guardian council appointed by the supreme leader. And the buck does not stop at Iran. All those living under authoritarian rule, like China, like Burma and others, deserve the right to establish their future under a democratic system. And as World United Voices, I believe we can make that happen.